It's now my great pleasure to hand over to our keynote speaker to open up today's global summit, and that's Professor Maurice Radebe, and he will guide us through this summit and open the summit for us as chair of the Association of African Business Schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Am I audible?
You are. Thank you.
Good, good. Well, I would say distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, all over the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, even early hours of the morning. We really appreciate you joining us in this very important summit. I wish to begin by acknowledging Good Governance Academy for convening this important global dialogue and for its ongoing work in connecting academic insight with governance practice. In particular, I would like to recognize Caroline again for her steady leadership in advancing that mission, both through the academy and through her close collaboration with Wits Business School. I'm speaking in my capacity here as a chair of Association of African Business School, and also wear my hat as the head of business school, Wits Business School. Caroline and I have worked together over several years, including the co-founding of Chapter Zero Southern Africa, where I had the privilege of serving as a chair of the board. I also want to highlight our partnership in the newly established, and I'd like to invite you to this one, Wits Mervyn King Center for Corporate Governance and Sustainability. And most of you, if you've been in business world, you know the name King reverberates throughout the whole corporate reporting. I remember as a young executive, every time there's King Code 1, and then before you understand it, there's King Code 2, and then 3, and now 4, and then 5 is on its way, and it's actually being launched as we speak. We are now having that center at Wits Business School. A milestone initiative named after Professor Mervyn King, whose work has shaped corporate governance worldwide. The center will serve as a hub for research, dialogue, and education, links governance excellence with sustainable impact. I personally invite you to be part of this initiative. Finally, I also want to acknowledge Anne. I haven't seen Anne here, Wilson, and the South African Business Schools Association. And I've also seen Dan here. It's very good to see you from the Global Business Network. This is an alliance of Wits, GGA, SABSA, AABS, to illustrate the fact that if we work together, we can make an impact. And I think that's a real reason why SDG number 17 is about partnership. And we're living it through this initiative right now. Right, let me just say it is my honor to open this Global Leadership Summit for Sustainable Transitions. Our theme is both urgent and hopeful. I'm going to speak a little bit from my heart because this subject, I've been dealing with it for over 3 decades. And I'm going to push us a little bit, not to stay in the cloud 9 of academic discussions and having a talk show, but having really used this summit as where we're going to come up with real practical actions of what we need to do. So our theme is both urgent, is very urgent, but also hopeful. Hopeful in the sense that there's always hope that things can change. And it depends on us as leaders, how we govern the intertwined transitions of trade, technology, and climate, so that development is not only faster, and I want to emphasize, but it's also fair. Because we can run fast, but being very unfair with the communities in which we operate. So it's very important that we make that point right up front here. Not only greener, but inclusive, so that we don't leave anybody behind in this journey. Not only innovative, but deeply human, because we're dealing with human beings here. And it's very important that we have this sense that these transitions of trade, technology, and climate is not only faster, but it's fair. It's not only greener, but it's inclusive, not only innovative, but deeply human. And that, to me, is the essence of what I want that we understand as leaders. I speak today as I say, wearing my head as an chair of board of the Association of African Business Schools. So I'll take an African perspective of this discussion. And I will, these two roles that I have converge on a simple proposition, which simply say transitions do not happen by accidents. They are governed into existence. It means we need to govern it into existence. The market will send signals of what changes needs to be done. Technologies will pick those signals and expand that into a possibility. And then citizens must express their aspirations. But it is leadership, you and I who are here, that makes these forces cohere into progress. Let me say this because it's very important. We've just finished our own board retreat as the board members of the the Association of African Business School. We've realized that right now, as we speak, Africa stands at a generational inflection point. We are a continent with vast resource endowments. Not only endowments under the ground, but the sun, the wind in abundance. The youngest talent pool on earth, critical minerals that will empower the global transition, and a lot of creativity and culture that we have in this continent. As one of our African proverbs would say, when the roots are deep, there's no reason to fear the wind. So we have got very deep roots, and it's very important that we understand that, not only as Africa, but globally. So I want to offer practical playbook. As I say, I'm not going to speak in an academic kind of language. I just want to talk practical things that we need to do. My training and background is academic. It's very important that I speak in that sense. So, leadership commitments that we need to make today and be clear about, I would like to call them as 5 C's. Clarity first. Secondly, credibility. Thirdly, coordination. And fourthly, capital. And then compassion. I will be brief on each of these ones, and I'll also talk a little bit about how we should use our resources to finance this development initiative that we're talking about. We cannot continue to rely in a dependency mode when we do have resources ourselves. Let me go with number one, clarity. We need to set a very clear purpose and a clear North Star, and be very clear about that, and a clear vision. And this is so critical. And vision that also has got clear measurable milestones. And in this vision, we must talk about domestic value add in all these resources that we're talking about as we manage trade. Digital inclusions, critical in the continent, and particularly also global South. The emission pathways must be take into consideration different peculiarities of the different regions. The pathways and the pacing of our way to the net zero carbon emissions are different, and we need to understand that. And they need to be guided by public budgets and private investments. So clarity is number one. We need to be clear, and I hope this summit will try to hone in on a very clear vision. The second one is credibility. We have lost a lot of credibility as leaders in this area. I mean, COP16 was here in South Africa. I was part of the leaders that were organizing COP16. And now we're in COP27, and there's a lot of credibility crisis that we have. I remember then we were promised a lot of money and resources. That was many, many years ago. But we lost credibility, and we need to restore that credibility. And this summit must send a signal that we're serious about what we want to do in terms of sustainability. So, discipline is important when you are to get credibility. Discipline in measuring these milestones that we will agree on, or some of them have already been agreed on. Quarterly delivery reviews, transparent dashboard, independent evaluation. You know, once you've got credibility, it compounds. So does lack of it. So it's very important that we focus on credibility. The next one is coordination, and I think this summit is really talking about SDG number 17. We need to have and establish a transition delivery units that will align ministries, regulators, industry, labor, financiers to really tackle these problems. These problems are complex. They can never be solved by isolated heroes or charismatic leaders that we tend to think they can save the world. It's a coalition of orchestrated, well-planned, complex coalitions that are going to solve these problems. Hence, coordination is so important in this initiative. Then the fourth one is capital. Now, this is where the challenge is where do we get the money? I think this is where we need to think very smartly, look at alternative funding sources, and particularly in Africa, and I'll talk a little bit about this, how do we use our resources that we have, not just to use them as a collateral, in other words, mortgage the future of our grandchildren, but how do we capitalize them in order to make sure that we've got finance? And here we need blended finance from the public budgets, development finance. A lot of development institutions needs to come into, private investments needs to come in, guarantees, performance contracts, offtake agreements that will make these kinds of projects to take place, revenue sharing models that actually fair, that will help this intent of transitioning into impact. Impact to us is very important, and therefore it is critical that we focus on that. And 5 here, I talk about compassion. We need to have social consent wherever we do these transitions in trade, technology, and climate. There should be no community that should be asked to choose between survival today and sustainability tomorrow. And we're putting our communities in that kind of way they have got to make these difficult choices. And I'm saying as leaders, we should not subject anybody. Our workers should not be subjected again to this kind of choice, which is you survival today or sustainability tomorrow. It just doesn't work like that in real life. So we do need to invest in reskilling, fairer compensations, and community ownership. Communities must own these initiatives. That's why they fall flat, because we lose this aspect of compassion. And therefore, as leaders, we need to have that sense that will help us to connect these commitments and deliver on them. And obviously, the 3 domains in which we need to govern in order to be able to bring this possibility into real prosperity. Trade, let's start with trade. Trade, we need definitely to move away from this philosophy and a policy that has governed the trade in this whole world. That is from extraction to value creation. I call it from pit to pot. We cannot continue with that kind of a mindset where the extraction of resources exported out of the continent, and then from there, value creation is outside the continent, and then it's brought back at even higher prices. We cannot continue with that. We must pivot from export raw commodities to exporting processed, certified, high-value goods. In other words, beneficiation should be key to really wipe out poverty. We cannot have a one-sided trade arrangements that as govern us. Now, one of the things that we need to look very carefully, because I can see this if we not look, is setting of standards. We must make sure that these standards that are set in this whole transitions, and this ranges from all the standards that are set here, including things like CBAM, should be bridges, not barriers. And we need to be very careful whenever we set standards that they are not exclusive of anybody or any part of the world. And that is very, very, very important. Because if you don't look very carefully, you cannot end up weaponizing the whole climate movement. And other people will feel negative completely and totally against it because of that. Trade corridors must be designed for goods, data, and finance to flow with effortlessness of a river. So that's very important. That's the only point I want to make here on trade. And I know that a lot of people who are going to speak here will amplify this point a little bit more in detail. Let's come to technology now. There's an area that we need. As we transition, there's just too many pilots now that are going on. Everybody's piloting that and that, which is fine. But we move with speed from pilots to platforms. Too many promising ideas stall in the valley of the almost it happens. I lead here at Wits Business School, a Center for Entrepreneurship, and we're seeing so many good ideas dying in this valley of death, from pilot to really commercializing it, and then a real making sure that we roll it out. And these platforms needs to be very, 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 very good in moving from being a pilot into a platform and into a solution. So I'll leave that in great detail. We need public digital infrastructure, the whole identity issues that we need in technology, payments, data exchanges, open APIs, so that innovators can build atop shared rails. So we need to have shared rails. Regulation should be so clear, it should create sandboxes, and those sandboxes will move into being policies and that are flexible, that are protecting both the users while enabling rapid iterations so that we can move very fast. Talent is the ultimate infrastructure, and I'm using the word very clearly. Talent is what we need to nurture, build, making sure, particularly universities must be problem-solving hubs, not just knowledge silos. And it's so important that we really focus on talent. We're talking about a youth dividend, but if we're not investing in that talent, we're not going to get that dividend, I promise you. Climate, that's the third domain that we're talking about here. The point I just want to make there is we must move away from pledges. We've made so many pledges before. From, as I say, I started getting into the COP movement in COP 16. Many pledges. These pledges must be converted into real commitments and delivery, and it must give pipelines of projects. The credibility gap, as I say, it's really bad. It leads to trust deficit. We must close that by bringing bankable projects quick, fast, and deliver them. And let us fund the preparations of these facilities or projects, standardize feasibilities, deploy blended finance to really match the capital from the private sector and to the public sector. Adaptation is not a cost center. It is a growth strategy in agriculture, water, cities, and nature-based solutions. We must look at that. So what am I saying really? I was using an African proverb. A river that forgets its source dries up. But a transition that forgets its people dries up too. So we as leaders must remember that. Finally, I'm coming to the financing side. Financing side, it's so important that Africa development cannot rely on volatile external capital, pro-cyclical debt alone. We need to develop our resource-based monetary systems or sovereignty that will actually look at way of how we can use all these assets that we have: gold, critical minerals, arable land, clean energy, even verified data, and how can we use these assets to create a diversified basket of domestic verifiable resources, from renewable to minerals, independently audited, ring-fenced, and valued, so that we can use these, think a little bit out of the box, not the traditional way that we finance. And we also need regulation that will make sure that it facilitates all these things, harmonize regulations across borders, so that we can be able to have cross-border settlements and currency issues that will always bedevil us in this project. So it is us as leaders are using structures like the African Continental Trade Free Trade Area to make sure we sort out all these things as leaders. Finally, social dividend is very important. We need to get community ownership. Climate and biodiversity safeguards. And we need to have spend rules that are clear, that channels the gains in from these initiatives into skills, into health, into research, into resilient infrastructure in the areas in which these resources are happening. And I was in Namibia the other day, and I challenged the Namibian leadership. I said, you've got all the resources. You've got there, gas, wind, hydrogen, sun. Use these resources. There's a saying that, natural resources, when discovered in Africa, they become a curse instead of a blessing. And I hope we as leadership, we will be able to move and making sure that it becomes a blessing. Now, the last three mechanisms that I suggest this summit look at, come up with within 90 days. Let's move very fast. Let's have a transition dashboard. Let's have a transition dashboard that will track trade facilitation, digital inclusion, climate finance mobilization, and it must be publicly available and independently verified. I don't know who's going to do it, but you've got a lot of smart people here. We've got over 350 people. Let's look at how we can have a dashboard like that we all look at it. And then we will need to develop, again, a pipeline exchange program, verified bankable projects matched to capital swiftly with safeguard and transparent safeguards, so that we eliminate corruption, we eliminate any evil intent, some people who will come in when they see these kinds of things. And then us as people in the academia, we must have a skills compact. 2-3 weeks ago, I was in AU. There's a strategy that has been developed for TVET colleges, because we need skills from apprenticeship to artisanships to micro-credentials, so that we can actually lift our people as we develop into this new transition. Universities, employers, and governments, we must co-design curriculum for green and digital jobs with portable micro-credentials and paid apprenticeships. Colleagues, the next decade will be decisive. The cost of hesitations are steep, but the dividends of actions are extraordinary. If we govern well, aligning trade with value creation, technology with opportunities that solve social problems and social ills of our world, climate action with justice, we can deliver resilient prosperity that is shared across regions and across generations. Yeah, I've got grandchildren now, so I think very much about what am I going to leave this continent and this world a better place than I found it. Leadership is going to give direction. May we choose clarity over confusion. May we choose credibility over grandstanding. May we choose coordination over silos. May we choose capital over caution. May we choose compassion over indifference. Let this summit be remembered, not for what we promised, but for what we set in motion. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much. I could see the love coming through with the reactions. It really was a fabulous opening. It's certainly something that we have to aspire to really be transitional leaders. And as you say, we have to do it with urgency in the next 90 days. Thank you very much for opening our summit. You've really set the tone for where we're going in our discussions.